Hi, I'm Philip Anthony Albertelli, and this is The Week in Doubt, a podcast for atheists, agnostics, and whoever, episode 27. There's a few different things I want to talk about today, but I'll start off with a recent news story that I discovered, like a lot of my news stories, through the Young Turks. In the 9/11 Museum at the World Trade Center site, there's a cross that's formed out of two intersecting I-beams. And I remember hearing about this cross a long time ago, how I guess you could say it's an artifact of 9/11. People noticed how the two I-beams in the wreckage were forming a cross, and it took on kind of a special meaning. And I guess there's a lot of atheists speaking out against the cross. And one of them was recently on Fox and Friends. I'll actually play the clip I got, I'll say courtesy of the Young Turks, even though I'm taking a Young Turks podcast and editing it to kind of extract the clip. But here we go.
The case has been brought because the other people, there were about 1,000 people called victims of 9/11 whose families were not Christian, and those families have been denied the ability to place a memorial in this museum to represent their faith or their family or their loved one that has perished. That's what the real crux of this lawsuit is. So those people, they're not being allowed to represent and honor their family members in this memorial. Some are Jewish, some are atheists, nonbelievers.
So I understand the Jewish point of view. I mean, if there may be symbols to represent the Jewish religion, as we know, but what do you put up for atheists?
No.
I mean, what
they
do you...
want a big A. If they take down let's say take down the cross, they want something else right next to it, like a big A for atheists.
I don't know that that's what they want, but they're like, it's such a great thing when they're like, the Jews, I guess I can understand the Jews. But atheists, we got to respect them too? They died in the buildings and we still have to respect them? Well, bowling's about to go over the top. Let's watch.
Absolutely crazy. This is nuts. Stop it. I was there. I lost a lot of friends in that. I watched that thing, that cross, what ended up being two I-beams put together. It happened. It was a symbol of hope for so many people who lost their lives, so many family members that went there every single day carrying stuffed animals to loved ones that they couldn't bury because they were buried in the rubble.
That is an artifact.
Leave it there. Raise it to the top, put it on the top. These atheists have nowhere to go with this. 2,000 people, by her own admission, Ms. McBain said 2,000 people are Christians there. That's a symbol to them. Stop it. And by the way, I think somewhere around 80% of America is Christian or believes in some form of Christianity. That symbolizes something very hopeful to them as well.
So there you have it. And if you're wondering who was that commenting in the middle of the clip, that was Cenk Uygur, the host of the Young Turks. And I think it's a great show. It's a progressive show, so if you're not politically progressive, you might not care for it. But I think they're fair and they have a common sense approach to things that maybe people of differing political viewpoints might be able to appreciate. But anyway, even though I'm usually very simpatico with the Young Turks, I'm not as worked up about this one as Cenk is. Cenk refers to himself as an agnostic. Here I am just using his first name as if I know him. Just a fan. He uses the term agnostic to refer to himself. And if you've been listening to this show, you know I'm still trying to search for the appropriate label. Maybe on a good day, I'll refer to myself as agnostic. On a bad day, an atheist. As contradictory as it might seem, thanks to Denver Chris, one of the first people to subscribe to the podcast, I'm now aware of the label agnostic atheist, which is basically someone who doubts the existence of God, but it basically admits that they can't disprove God's existence. But being a non-believer myself, you might expect me to automatically side with the atheists on this one. But my viewpoint on this is pretty much similar to my viewpoint on the quote-unquote war on Christmas. Every holiday season, Bill O'Reilly talks about the war on Christmas. And even though I don't agree with a lot of what Bill O'Reilly says, I think that his suggestion that atheists wage this annual war on Christmas actually has some merit to it. I don't know if this is too strong a term, but perhaps what you might call militant atheists. By militant, I don't mean they're carrying rocket launchers or hurling glass and rocks at people. Just militant in their their extreme beliefs. Every year, quote unquote, militant atheists will do things like put up billboards or posters that say things like "There is no God, so be good for goodness sake," or they argue for getting the nativity scenes out of public places, getting traditional, religious Christmas music out of stores, say shopkeepers or checkout people, instead of wishing people a Merry Christmas, offering a more generic Happy Holidays, just stuff like that. And as I've talked about on the show before, even though I'm a non-believer, that's where my reason has led me to doubt the existence of a higher power. There's still a lot of things I like about religion. I was raised Catholic, and even though I'm not a believer, I almost feel like a lot of the traditions are in my blood in a way. Christmas is still my favorite time of year. Some of my favorite music is traditional Christmas music. I get kind of a sense of joy or consolation when people say Merry Christmas to me. They can say Happy Holidays too if they like. I like when I walk into a store and I hear traditional music. I like when I drive through the center of a town and I see a nativity. It doesn't bother me. To me, atheism isn't a religion. It's an absence of religion. Whatever other people want to believe is fine. And having being raised Christian and still having a certain amount of affection for some of the symbolism and traditions, I don't mind religious Christmas symbolism. I actually kind of enjoy it. And so I'm kind of sympathetic with religious people on this 9/11 cross thing too. It is true that there were plenty of other people other than Christians who died on 9/11. There were Muslims, there were Jews. I'm sure there were probably atheists or agnostics in there as well, and who knows, maybe Buddhists or whatever. And I just did a show last week about Jefferson and deism and the founding fathers. And if you listen to that, you'll know that I don't like when people on the right wrap themselves in the flag and try to claim the founding fathers of the history of the country as their own, or try to paint the history of the country as being more traditionally or conventionally Christian than perhaps it was. But that being said, yeah, even if the founding fathers, or a good deal of them, were deists, the country has been a Christian country for a long time. I would hesitate to call it a Christian country now, because I think in fairness to all the citizens, we're a melting pot. And Christianity might still be the majority, but there's a lot of other people with different faiths who are citizens of this country too. But it doesn't bother me if Christians are the majority. Doesn't bother me things like the Ten Commandments and courthouses, things like that. I'm not offended by things like that. And so if a lot of people got a sense of comfort out of this quote unquote 9/11 cross, and whether or not people got comfort from it or not, it is can't believe I'm agreeing with Fox and Friends, but it's an artifact in the sense. It's part of the story and the history of 9/11. So I think, at least as an artifact of sorts, it definitely belongs in the museum. And that guy you heard going kind of wild at the end, that was Eric Bolling. And that's definitely a guy who rubs me the wrong way. He puts his foot in his mouth again and again, says kind of, it's been known to say racially charged things on the air numerous times. I don't really care for the guy. The only thing he ever did that made me like him a little is recently the one liberal guy they have on their show called The Five, Bob Beckel, I believe his name is. Bowling gave him a shot in the arm for like interrupting him or something like that, and Bob Beckel dropped an F-bomb on the air. And I was actually surprised. Bowling kind of took the bullet. He manned up, and he seems like he actually cared about Beckel and wanted to make sure that he let the audience know that it was at least in part his fault that he had kind of he had hit Beckel pretty hard, and if it wasn't for him, Beckel probably wouldn't have been driven to have sworn on the air. So it seemed like loyalty to a friend or a colleague that made me respect him a bit. But and in this case, I kind of agree with Cenk that the guy was, as usual, a bit over the top there near the end of the segment. I'm not even sure if I consider myself an atheist. As I just said, you can call me an agnostic if you want. You can call me an atheist. You can call me an agnostic atheist. I doubt the existence of a higher power or an afterlife, but I'm not so arrogant as to claim I know for sure that there isn't a creator. Whatever that makes me, you can decide and choose your label. But I think atheists, in the sense of fellow non-believers, they kind of give us, those kind of militant atheists kind of give us a bad name. They look kooky or fringe when they go out of their way to try to yank religion out of schools and public places. And to me, it's kind of a matter of decency and taste. If that cross is part of the history of 9/11, if it gives even some people comfort, let it go, man. Let it go. 9/11, one of the worst tragedies in human history, I would say, at least in recent history. And if it gives anyone any sense of consolation, let it go. Why are you trying to yank it for? You know what I mean? But anyway, that's my opinion on that. So what else did I want to talk about? Oh yeah, I learned a new word this week, theodicy. And I learned it because I was watching a debate on the subject between Barty Ehrman. I still have trouble pronouncing his name. I want to blend it all together in one name. His middle initials, D. Professor Ehrman, versus Dinesh D'Souza, who is this well-known Christian apologist. I don't think he'd probably take offense at that term. But anyway, theodicy, this is the dictionary definition: defense of God's goodness and omnipotence in view of the existence of evil. Other forms, plural, theodicies. Then Wikipedia, they say theodicy usually refers to an attempt to resolve the evidential problem of evil by reconciling God's traditional characteristics of omnibenevolence, omnipotence, and omniscience, all-loving, all-powerful, and all-knowing respectively, with the occurrence of evil in the world. And that's, I didn't even know there was a term for this, but theodicy. And this, so I guess without even knowing it, I've discussed theodicy multiple times on the show. And I give kind of reason-based reasons why I doubt the existence of God or an afterlife. I think that it's evident that religions and the concepts of God that they contain are all man-made, and I believe that consciousness is an emergent property of the human brain, and when the brain goes, consciousness probably goes too. But sorry to bum you out. But anyway, I also talk about how I have I think a lot of atheists do, moral reasons for not believing. And one of them, at the top of that list would probably be the existence of evil in the world. And just because there's quote-unquote evil in the world, and I put evil in quotes because it has kind of a spiritual connotation, and a lot of non-believers kind of eschew using the word evil. But I tend to use it. I think there's some things, some actions that are so wicked, that outrage our moral sensibilities so much, that are so atrocious, that it's fitting to use the word evil, even though I don't believe in a supernatural evil. But just because, and the reason why I say it's kind of an emotional or moral reason, not necessarily a scientific or reason-based reason for not believing, it's because just because evil exists in the world doesn't necessarily mean there's not a God. You could, well, I guess Christians, and I find these kind of faulty explanations or excuses, would say that it's our fault. We can trace the root of evil in the world back to the fall in the garden, that the first two humans ate the wrong kind of fruit, and now we're all paying for it in the most horrible of ways. That doesn't make sense to me in a lot of ways, and it's kind of a tricky situation, because a lot of people who don't take the Bible literally, or have a kind of a cafeteria Catholic approach to the Bible, they might say the Garden of Eden is a metaphor or an allegory. But if it's a metaphor, then was there even a fall in the garden? If it was a metaphor, why did Jesus have to die to redeem man? But we know scientifically that there probably weren't the first, just two humans out of nowhere. As much as some people might try to refute it or close their eyes to it, evolution is a fact. There might be some gaps in our knowledge, but we know evolution's a fact. Not only do we have the fossil record, but now we have DNA evidence as well. We can see how species are related to other species. So we developed from previous species, eventually gave way to modern Homo sapiens. So there would have been lots of early humans, not just two of them on, by the lonesome in some garden somewhere. And I think another religious explanation for evil in the world might be free will. God loves us so much, he gives us the ability to make the wrong decisions and do bad things. Remember, even as a young child, I used to wonder, well, if God made everything, and if God knows everything, then didn't he know when he made everything? Wasn't he aware of all the bad choices we were going to make? Couldn't he done some tinkering and at least make us the type of creatures, even if we had some free will, made better decisions and weren't so nasty? And the other problem with that, a lot of the ills in the world have nothing to do with man at all. Horrible birth defects, natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, things like that. If you're a fundamentalist religious type with a bit of a mean streak, you might try to say that the natural disasters come from God and we deserve them. And if you lived in the first century, you might say that birth defects and disease are payback for doing something wrong, or your family doing something wrong, your parents or whatever. I think that's a nasty and ignorant and outdated point of view as well. So you can see the problem of evil in the world isn't an easy one to make jive with the belief in a good God. But that's another thing. I always talk about it's our impulse to want to assume if there is a God, that he, she, or it is good, enlightened, loving. But you could argue, if religion's a man-made, we don't really know, even if God exists, what type of temperament or personality or agenda he, she, or it has. There could be lots of different possibilities. Maybe even a God that's not so nice. That's a horrible thing to consider, and I definitely don't like thinking about it. But I guess in a weird way, it would kind of be in keeping with the kind of nastier side of the Yahweh of the Old Testament. But which Christopher Hitchens used to like to talk about his prime example of what he perceived as wickedness on God's part in the Old Testament was when God commanded the slaughter of the Amalekites, including women and children, and saving only the young girls who haven't known a man yet. And Christopher Hitchens used to slyly joke that, well, we can pretty much guess why they kept the young girls who hadn't known men yet, what purpose they would serve. But I think he might have joked before that maybe they were kept as, maybe you could propose they were kept as pets, and maybe they weren't used as sex objects or whatever. But that's just one story from the Old Testament that's kind of disturbing at the least. But anyway, see, I was being nice to religious people with the 9/11 cross story. Now here I am being my crotchety self again. But anyway, I think that's a really interesting word, theodicy. And I want to say, in fairness to even the most prominent Christian apologists I've seen in debates, like Dinesh D'Souza or William Lane Craig. It's another one whose name is eluding me right now. But I think I've heard people like this even admit that, you know, it's not an easy thing to dismiss or to try to explain away. So I think even thoughtful theologians and apologists admit that it's a problem even for them, trying to, as I said before, trying to make the existence of evil or suffering in the world jibe with the idea of a good God. But I knew there was something I wanted to talk about with this. Oh yeah. So, did I just sound like the Kool-Aid guy? Oh yeah. But anyway, so Dinesh D'Souza and Bart D. Ehrman were debating, and I think one of D'Souza's attempts to explain why there's evil in the world is that it must come from human free will, or only humans can really do evil and not other animals. And Bart D. Ehrman, the more I see this guy talk, the more I like him. And he started out, well, I think he said he wasn't super religious as a kid, but then he became kind of a born again or a strong evangelical Christian. And then he attended, I think, seminary and colleges, and he ended up being, professor of biblical history, biblical literature, things like that. I don't know what the exact term for his profession is, but he's a biblical scholar and he's a professor. And he said what kind of shook his faith or started his faith to crumble was studying all the different versions of the Bible, not just looking at the inaccuracies we have inherent in, say, a given version of the Bible. If you open up the King James Bible, there's contradictions between the different Gospels. And even, if we go back to the Old Testament, there's things like doublets where the same story recurs more than once, but in a somewhat altered fashion. So it wasn't just that, but it was when he began to read, because he learned a multitude, he learned various different languages just for the purpose of studying the Bible. And he learned how not only were there differences inherent in the canonical Bible, but when you read different versions of the various books of the Bible in different languages, there's even more differences. And things like how we don't even have the originals. The originals have been lost to us, so we're basically reading copies of copies, and it gets very convoluted. But anyway, he said that the kind of icing on the cake, the big thing that made him go from being a believing Christian to an agnostic, as he described himself now, is the problem of suffering in the world. And that touches me whenever I know that someone doesn't believe because of the problem of suffering in the world. And I think it speaks to me about a person's character, because it says that the person is a sensitive thoughtful and caring enough person that what other human beings and what other animals, go through means something to them. And they want an explanation. They want to know why people have to suffer, why creatures have to suffer. It's not enough to just come up with some theological excuse for why suffering takes place in the world. And I'm not saying you're only a good person if you give up your religion because you're bothered by suffering. Not in the least. That's not at all what I'm saying. It just, to me, it says something about a person's character. It says they have a certain sensitivity about them that I admire. And so Barty Ehrman, there I go again saying it like it's one word, was talking about how he has a pet cat, and sometimes his cat will not only capture a mouse, but it will play with and torture the mouse before finally dispatching it. And Dinesh D'Souza, the grand sophist that he is, tried to say that only humans can be tortured, that animals can't be tortured. And he tried to say that, if you're tossing someone up in the air and threatening to impale them with a bayonet, that the real torture comes from the knowledge of death, that they can be aware and contemplate their own death and know what's coming, and that's where torture comes from. And I found this really offensive, and I think Professor Ehrman did too, because he talked about how, and this is such a grim, gruesome thing to talk about, but I think what D'Souza was trying to, when he was giving the example of the bayonet and tossing someone in the air, that's something that, there have been atrocities in the past during war where babies or toddlers have been thrown in the air and impaled on bayonets. And Professor Ehrman is quick to say, well, if you're talking about that, you're probably talking about babies, and they probably aren't conscious, probably aren't self-aware enough yet to realize that their cruel treatment is going to ultimately result in their death. And I don't know if Dinesh D'Souza actually believes this, and he's even admitted before to sometimes simply using rhetorical debating techniques, even if he doesn't really believe in what he's saying, in order to try to win the argument. I've seen him admit to that debating Hitchens before, and that doesn't sit well with me. Sophistry is bad enough, but if you're actually willing to say something that you don't necessarily believe just to try to win an argument, if we're arguing about religion, one of the good things I think that can come out of these debates between believers and non-believers is hopefully that maybe we can take another small step towards the truth. How can we do that if people are willing to say whatever to win an argument? But this idea that only humans can be tortured because they're self-aware, I'm thinking about anyone who's had a beloved pet or who cares in the smallest about animals. Maybe you've looked at your pet when it was suffering. If you're like me, I've had to put a couple of pets down. Well, actually, no. I had one beloved Chihuahua, not the one I have now, who had a collapsed. I adopted the dog, and he'd spent the first 2 years of his life trapped in a basement. Then he was rescued. I adopted him, and he had a collapsed trachea, the equivalent of doggy asthma, heart murmur, and there was another thing too. And his health kept degenerating no matter how much medicine I would get him, and the vet would keep upping the doses, and eventually, he died on my lap trying to rush him to a hospital one winter. And before that, the family dog that my parents got when I was a young teenager ended up living to be almost 20, I believe, and one day just couldn't get out of bed. and I'm the one who took the dog to the vet to be put down. So if you have a beloved dog a dog or any other animal that's ever suffered, I mean, you can look in their eyes, the labored breath, you can see their suffering, or even emotional suffering, you know, when your dog doesn't want you to leave the house or something like that. Or if you're walking down the street and you see a bird or some small animal that's that's been injured, or it's taking its last gasps, and you can tell that it's in a miserable state. Or even something like, you know, there's some cruel examples in nature, the way that killer whales will toy with like sea lions before they eat them. They'll whack them back and forth like volleyballs or something like that. And you know, a sea lion's a mammal. It's probably smart enough to, I know it's definitely smart enough to know fear. I don't know how much it can contemplate its own existence. I'm just about sure it doesn't have the same level of sentience as, say, a chimp or a dolphin or something like that. But I'm sure it's aware enough to know when it's suffering, when it's in pain, when it's frightened. So this idea that animals can't be tortured, or that they don't know fear and suffering like we do, I think it's asinine, it's deplorable. And like I said, I don't know if Dinesh D'Souza went into that just as a debating tactic, or if that's what he really believes. I hope it's not what he really believes. There was one more thing I want to get into. I mean, I've been at this for over 30 minutes now, so I probably could call it quits, but I'll probably just try to jam it into this episode. And it's something I was going to refer to as the dark side of unbelief. Well, I know I've probably talked about it on the show before, how I'm kind of fascinated by, even though I don't believe in it whatsoever, I'm fascinated by religion, by the paranormal, the occult. You know, if there's something on the History Channel, if it's about secret societies, if it's about ghosts, if it's about Bigfoot, if it's about witchcraft or whatever, I will watch it and I'll love it. You know, I eat that stuff right up, even though I don't believe in it. So I think, you know, when I was growing up, I listened to a lot of heavy metal. There's still a lot of heavy metal I like. The band I was in with my friends, I think technically we're still together, we just don't play anymore, was essentially a heavy metal band, alternative metal maybe. And a lot of the music I listened to and still listen to is kind of dark. I'm a big fan of, say, like Marilyn Manson. Not only his music, but I think he's actually a really bright guy too. People like Glenn Danzig and his older bands, like the Misfits and Samhain, Celtic Pronunciation, Samhain. Yeah, I even like weird dark art, you know, art of Hieronymus Bosch and Geiger and stuff like that. So I think I was just like watching some videos on weird occult things like Aleister Crowley and different things, and somehow I came across a video on YouTube. It was a full-length interview, really surreal. It was Bob Larson, who is this prominent religious figure. He hosts a radio show. He performs exorcisms. I think he even had a TV show, a reality show where he performed exorcisms. And this was back in the 80s, I think, and he was interviewing Anton LaVey's daughter. Anton LaVey was the founder of the Church of Satan. And husband, I don't know if they were married at the time, maybe they were, but the daughter's name is Zena LaVey, and the husband is Nicholas Schreck. And usually, before this, I never cared much for Bob Larson. I thought he was full of you-know-what. I thought he was not only full of crap and, you know, a fraud, because I don't believe in exorcism. I don't believe in demonic possession. But I thought he was also just kind of a disagreeable person. I didn't really care for his attitude or his demeanor or whatever. But, and so I thought I was going to be on the side of the Satanists, which is such a weird thing to say, you know, listening to it come out of my mouth. not every day you say, oh, I thought I would be on the side of the Satanists. But if you have an understanding about the Church of Satan, supposedly, LaVey is now passed, but according to LaVey when he was alive and other spokespeople for the church, it's almost like an atheist organization in the sense that they don't believe in a literal God. They don't literally believe in the devil. To them, the devil is a symbol, and it's basically kind of an earthly religion that's all about advocating, the human will and advocating the self and things like that. But they supposedly, they practice like destruction rituals and this and that. I don't know how much of that is psychodrama and catharsis or how much they actually believe there's a supernatural element. Seems a little contradictory, but supposedly they don't actually believe in a devil. So that given, I kind of thought that I would tend to be on their side. But I quickly found myself surprisingly on Bob Larson's side, and Bob Larson was actually pretty amenable, I thought, during the interview, and it is probably the most pleasant I've ever seen him. And I guess Satanism, the at least the brand of Satanism practiced by the official Church of Satan, is partially influenced by Ayn Rand. Is it Ayn or Anne? Ayn Rand. And I really don't care for her philosophy at all. If you're listening and you're a conservative, you might be familiar with her writings like The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. She's kind of this cult figure of adoration for libertarians and for far-right conservatives. Right now, Mitt Romney chose Paul Ryan for his running mate, and Paul Ryan, even though he's been forced to backpedal, is a huge Ayn Rand fan, and has even promoted her philosophy on video or whatever, but now he's trying to backpedal because it's becoming more well known that she was not only an atheist, but she had this kind of Nietzschean philosophy about only the strong are deserving of love, only the strong are deserving of pretty much everything. And you can actually, I think there's an interview with her conducted by Mike Wallace, an old black and white interview you can find online on YouTube. But it's really disturbing stuff. It's this really me type of philosophy. It's all about the individual and how anyone who is weak or needy is basically a parasite. And the Church of Satan, at least if you listen to this Nicholas Schreck guy and LaVey's daughter, really incorporates that idea, where these two were saying that, well, like I would say, we're basically animals, except they put a really negative spin on it. I guess they've never heard of the concept of animal altruism. They're basically saying that we're basically just another animal, and animals don't go out of their way to do nice things for each other. In the animal kingdom, it's all about the strong. And even though there is the Darwin, this kind of Darwinian idea of the survival of the fittest, etc. I did a whole show, and I believe I already upped it to YouTube, about morality, atheism and morality, and how there's strong examples of what scientists call proto-ethics in the animal kingdom, and strong examples of altruism. And they like to, at least this Nicholas Schreck guy, he has a band called Radio Werewolf, and he has some kind of Order of the Wolf, or something like a werewolf order, like an offshoot of the Church of Satan, at least he did. And it was all about how, wolves are strong and merciless, and we need to unleash the beast in man and all this stuff. And whenever Bob Larson would try to appeal to their humanity, he'd say something like, if you found yourself in an Ethiopian refugee camp and saw children, women starving to death and crying or whatever, you wouldn't want to help them. And, I think the Count Cassidy said, like, why would I be there? Or she said, like, why are they allowed to exist in the first place? And I think Zena LaVey also said something like, would a wolf, some ridiculous analogy, like, would a wolf spend money to help another animal up in the tree, or something totally ridiculous? And I'm thinking, and no, it's scary, as I saw a related video where that guy Nicholas Schreck was being interviewed by, I believe his first name's Tom Metzger, who is this well-known white power guy. And during the interview, Schreck was proudly showing off the Norse rune he had on his shoulder, on his jacket, and talking about how white Europeans have to unleash the beast in them and stuff. All this kind of thinly veiled racial Nazi stuff. Now, I have nothing against Nordic runes and this and that. I myself am an admirer of mythologies from all around the world, including Viking or Norse mythology. But usually, white power people, if you see them using Nordic symbolism, it's something they're pretty much borrowing from the Nazis. The Nazis were that's another thing. A lot of times people will try to say the Nazis were atheists or Hitler was an atheist. The Nazis, at least the elite officers like Goebbels and whatnot, Himmler, they were steeped in this weird Nordic occultism. And it turns out, if I can trust what I read online, that I think the Schreck guy, his real name was like Barry Dubin or something like that, and that it's possible that he's actually of Jewish descent. And if you look at Anton LaVey's history or ancestry, he was born, I think, Howard Stanton Levy, not LaVey. And there's a good chance he was of Jewish ancestry in part as well. So this is strange stuff. And and so back on using animals as analogies for human morality or the lack thereof. So he says it's ridiculous to say, oh, animals are just, since we're animals, we humans, that means we don't owe anyone anything. It means we can behave however we like. It means we don't have to worry about the weak, only the strong survive. In a way, it's true in a Darwinian sense that the strongest animals' genes are usually the ones that get passed down because they're the healthiest, they're the ones most able to mate, etc. But there's so many examples of altruism in the animal kingdom. And the Satanists would probably admire the vampire bat example, I would imagine. But I think vampire bats are cool animals. But even vampire bats will fly back to the roost and regurgitate blood for sick or injured roost mates. As I've talked about before, even the crocodile with these huge, kind of prehistoric jaws it uses to rend apart its prey, it will gently deliver its young into the water where they can get a start in life. A lot of primates, even animals like meerkats, will let out calls or cries, alerts to let the rest of the members of their social unit know there's a predator on the way, even though by them crying out they're drawing the attention of the predator to themselves. And apparently this guy believes in wolf imagery or symbolism so much, and he thinks it's a symbolism how we don't need to care about the weak. But wolves and other wild canids will often bring food back, probably via regurgitation, for weaker members of the pack. And wolves have strong family social structures, probably in certain ways similar to our own. So you have this fictitious idea of the wolf as this kind of this powerful lone animal who doesn't owe anything to anyone, and the symbol of strength. Then you have the real animal, where wolves run in packs. There's a social hierarchy. There's the alpha wolf, then there's a wolf that's at the bottom of the ladder. But even the wolf at the bottom of the ladder is still a member of the pack. And wolves and other wild canids have been known to, as I said, share food with weak and injured members. So this idea that I don't know, up until this, I admired members of the Church of Satan from afar in a way that I was like, oh, okay, I can understand, the attraction to occult symbolism and all the pomp and circumstance and the showmanship of it or whatever. And the fact that they didn't believe literally in a deity or a devil, I can understand that. And I can understand having a kind of morbid fascination. But this kind of repugnant idea that you find with Ayn Rand and you find with at least these representatives of the Church of Satan, I think they had a falling out with the church, and now they have their own thing going. So I don't know if their view is a factual representation of what most members of the Church of Satan believe. But I found their ideas repugnant. It stank of social Darwinism. And even this guy was anti-gay. He claimed gay sex wasn't hygienic. Whether it is or not, I don't know. I imagine... I don't want to go down a too graphic a route. But he was anti-gay. He said that being gay wasn't natural. Once again, this guy doesn't seem to know much about zoology or biology. There's plenty of examples of homosexuality and bisexuality in the animal kingdom too. So he said that being gay was unnatural. He's basically a social Darwinist, didn't believe we owed anything to weaker members of society. And he kept claiming that Satanism was a religion of the elite. It was a religion of the rulers of the world. And I saw him say something similar in an interview with his band, Radio Werewolf. And I was thinking, really? I'm like, how elite is this guy? I mean, I'm not saying I'm elite, not by any stretch of the imagination. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, but usually when you think of elite, you think of someone who holds a lot of power, or someone who has a lot of power or prominence, maybe a world leader, a high-ranking politician, or something like that, or even maybe a top-earning actor or pop musician or something. I'm like, what's this guy? I mean, he's in this band that most people have never heard of. He's a member of these occult groups that most people probably haven't heard of. Maybe, most people might have heard something about the Church of Satan, which he's no longer a member of. I mean, he's just some dude who's got a little band, just like I got a little band, or at least did, and maybe has a cult following, no pun intended, and he's just this kind of fringe figure that most people haven't heard of. So is he the elite? Is he powerful? Is he a leader of men? Come on, give me a break. But I just wanted to bring this up to point how, not all atheists are like me, or at least like I hope I am, somewhat of a humanist, kind of a sensitive person who believes that even if you don't believe in a creator, you can still be a moral being and care for others. So, I don't know. It's just, as a non-believer, I couldn't be further away from people like Ayn Rand and this guy. So usually, I've never really talked about that before. I've never really talked about the kind of dark side of unbelief before on the show. I've ripped into religion plenty, and I've pointed out how I might differ from some other non-believers, even ones I admire like Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins, but I never really shone a light on people like Ayn Rand and their kind of social Darwinist views. And like Richard Dawkins, he's a scientist, a biologist, and huge admirer of Charles Darwin, but he always says, he's fascinated by biological Darwinism, and he has almost this love affair with the theory of evolution and with biology. It's one of the things I admire about him. But he also said he's the first to admit that he doesn't approve of social Darwinism. He thinks social Darwinism is repugnant. This kind of sociopathic idea that we should just care about ourselves and step on everyone else's backs on our way up to the top of the ladder. And I agree with him. But I think I've gone on enough. So this is this week's episode. I covered a few things, so good for me. And as always, if you enjoyed this or other episodes on YouTube, please subscribe or like us. You can also rate us on iTunes or Podbean. You can subscribe through iTunes, and any of that would be much appreciated. This has been the Week in Doubt. Thanks for listening.